So, hello everyone, and you're very welcome to this virtual Féile on Phobal debate, Union or Unity, the financial debate. My name is Aine Lawlor, and my job is to moderate this session, and I'd like to begin by introducing our two speakers today, and they are Dr. Graham Gudgin, who's the Chief Economic Advisor with the leading UK think tank, the Policy Exchange. He also holds a number of academic positions, including at Cambridge University and the University of Ulster, and was Special Advisor to former First Minister David Trimble. And Graham Gudgin is arguing the case for union today. Our other speaker is Conor Devine. He's from the GDP Partnership. He's a businessman, an author, a multiple Ironman triathlete, who also happens to live with MS. And Conor is arguing the financial case for unity today. And just a caveat before we begin, I'm not by any manner or means a financial journalist nor an economist, so forgive any ignorance on my part or in the questions. My job today is to moderate and put the questions that I think a lot of average voters will be questioning themselves about in the arguments that go on in the years ahead. So we're really grateful that the two of you have agreed to kick off our discussion today. And Graham, on this one, I'll start with you. And it's the context really, before we start talking about the various nuts and bolts of the economic and financial arguments for union or unity. It's the question about whether money does matter more than identity, whether Brexit maybe proves that sovereignty matters more than an economic hit. Your view first, and then I'll go to Conor.
Thank you, Anya. Yeah, it's my very firm view that identity is the key thing. Although I'm an economist, I don't believe that this is essentially an economic argument. You can't solve it by saying that you'll be a bit better off in one state or another. I mean, that was obviously true for the Republic in 1921. But there wasn't much prospect of being better off independence. And indeed, the Republic was worse off for several decades after independence. But I don't think that mattered. It was a matter of national identity. And the majority in the Republic felt they were Irish, not British, and wanted to be in an independent state. I think if living standards, say, were the key issue, then lots of people around the world would all be applying to be the 51st state of the US. And in fact, as far as I know, no one is applying to be the 51st state of the, well, perhaps Puerto Rico is, but a special case. But by and large, people don't want to settle their national sovereignty on the basis of living standards. It's a matter of national identity. People want their country to represent their identity. And therefore, although we could have a debate and a discussion about the economics of Irish unity, it'll be my firm contention all the way through that that's not a key issue. Even if people in Northern Ireland felt they would be better off in the Republic, I still don't think that would make very much difference to the views of those who either do or don't support Irish unity.
And Conor, what do you make of that? Before we get talking about, the economics right now and into the future, does history teach us, recent history as well as the history of 100 years ago, that choices about identity and belonging matter more than economics and living standards?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm not attached to any political party. I have no political axe to grind. I was born in Tyrone in the late 70s and grew up through the Troubles in the 80s. And I see myself as an Irish person. I have no issues with my identity in the constitutional range-up. I never had. I'm very confident in my identity. And I think it's a fascinating discussion. We're going to talk about the financial side of it, but I'm actually really interested, and I'm surprised that Graham actually has opened the gambit with that approach. And the reason why I say that, and I think these discussions are to be welcomed, I think they're now happening every day in Northern Ireland, and they're catching in the South. But if you were to follow, it's a fascinating situation that Graham has presented. If you were to follow that pathway, I think if you were a Republican or a nationalist listening to that, you'd be rubbing your hands in glee, because if you look at the balance of power, which has switched for the first time in Stormont last year, where there's unionists now don't have the control, it's likely to be rubber stamped next year. And if you follow that pathway where it's an identity issue, then in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, it's only a matter of time before there's a United Ireland, because there'll be more people who nominate as Catholic or nationalist in Northern Ireland. So for me, I really don't see it that way. And I am surprised that Graham sort of opened in that regard, because with that approach, then it's really, you're really only counting down the time if identity is the key thing. So for me then, a progressive person, someone who wants to, whenever I'm talking about these kinds of issues, sometimes from a nationalist background, it might be viewed as a divisive topic. And I just don't think we're at a stage now where these kinds of conversations, they can't be divisive because they're too important. And I am 43 years of age at the moment today, and I have a young girl at 10. And whenever I'm talking about this kind of stuff, I'm trying to figure out, what's this place going to look like in 2030? So Liliana's going to be 30 then. What's her job prospects going to be like in Belfast? What's her health service going to be like? What's her education provision going to be like? Is it going to be a nice place to live? Is it going to be a good economy? Or, is it going to be investment to invest in big challenges like climate change? All of that stuff. So I think one of the challenges for politicians, it's a very difficult job to be a politician. And I think Graham advised one of our great politicians in David Trimble, and another the most strategic politician in unionism, arguably in the last 50 years, Peter Robinson, has come out in the last the last 12 months to say there's going to be a Porter poll, people need to start preparing for that. And that's why I disagree with Graham fundamentally, because I think it's shaky ground for a unionist to approach it on that basis, because you're going to run out of road. But if you're on my page then, and you're really then only interested in how do we build our economy? How do we build our health service? Are we happy with our education provision? Those are the questions that I think are more important to me, because I don't have an identity issue. Most of my friends, I have a huge network, thousands of people. I have a business which is committed to solving problems every day. I speak to 50 people a week, 200 a month, 2,000 people a year. We're trying to solve problems all the time. And to be honest with you, when there's something going on in Northern Ireland right now, and I call it a brand of unionism, which is really political unionism. And to be honest, I think their approach right now is wrong. And I think it's self-defeating, because the unionist demographic that I meet with in business and I speak to in sport, they're not represented at all by political unionism today. And I think that's a challenge for unionism. So for me, Aine, very clearly, I am a pound, shillings and pence man. I don't have an identity issue. I'm very confident in my Irishness. It's no issue for me. If it's Northern Ireland, an All Ireland, a United Ireland, whatever, I'm more interested, and this is where we get into it, is how do we build this place? How do we make and build a better society? I honestly believe that that's what's going to be the deciding factor for the majority of people in Northern Ireland. And this is why, one of the things I do is I help people understand money and finance, because believe it or not, a lot of people are financially illiterate. They don't understand finance, right? And I do that every week. Every day I try and teach people about that. And I personally believe once people understand the finances, and this is the key point, I think that will win, that will top it over to, well, it will help people understand what they're voting for whenever the referendum will come around.
Okay, and we'll come on to a lot of the points you raised there in a moment, Conor. By the way, happy birthday from everyone. Graham, do you want to answer that point before we move on? That point about identity politics, it's shrinking territory in Northern Ireland, and that there's a growing section of the electorate that won't be decided by that kind of politics, particularly in the years and decade ahead.
Yes, thank you, Aine. Yeah, I'd like to come back on a couple of points, if I may. First is the demographics. This is perhaps the great white hope of many nationalists, that the people of Catholic background, if we can describe them in that way, will become a majority in Northern Ireland. And I've looked at this very carefully. I'm an economist, but I'm I'm also a statistician. I've looked at it, and it seems to me that there will never be that majority. Partly if you look at the religious affiliation of those in the schools, children, particularly in primary schools, then the proportion of Catholics is falling, not rising. If you project that forward, it seems to me that the Catholic proportion in Northern Ireland will probably peak at about 47–48%. And then we have to remember that a proportion of those, I mean, perhaps about 5% of the Catholic population are not ethnically Irish. They come from the Philippines, Lithuania, Poland, other Catholic countries. We don't really know very much about the views of a united Ireland or how they would vote. The third thing to say is that the reliable polls, the polls like the Life and Time survey run from Queen's University, put the proportion of those supporting a united Ireland at about 22–24%, and only about half of the Catholic population supporting united Ireland. Even in the last census, there was a surprisingly small number of Catholics even had Irish passports. I mean, I think it was about 40% or something of that sort. So the demographics aren't really with this, I think. But the fact that the two communities are so evenly balanced, always causes a problem. This would be a problem anywhere in the world, in my view, because of the balance and the history. The second thing to say, if I might just quickly, is that although the Good Friday Agreement says that United Ireland could be decided on a 50% plus one majority, I don't think anybody really views that as practical politics. Leo Varadkar doesn't, for instance. I think Micheál Martin has also come out and said, look, it would be a nonsense to try and forge a united Ireland, a new country in a sense on that basis. If you had something like 1 million disaffected Protestants inside the Republic taken in against their will, that would be a recipe for all sorts of problems, I think. The only way to get a united Ireland, I think, is probably to have a majority of the Protestant population supporting it in practice. And as far as we can see, that's never going to happen. So I don't think there'll be a border poll. Even if there was, I think it would be won massively by the unionist population. So to me, it's something of a non-issue. I mean, I'm happy to discuss the economics, as a hypothetical matter, but I don't think this is a matter of practical politics at all.
Well, let's move on to the crux of this debate now, the financial aspects. Conor, what is the financial case for unity?
Well, I think as someone, I suppose at my stage of life, where I would say I'm in my prime, I'm building my business, I'm speaking to people. It's a really exciting time for me, and the sort of Catholic Protestant sort of discussion depresses the life out of me completely. And to be honest, like I met people who would, I don't like talking about religion, because I started mixing with people from a different religion at 10 years of age in Cookstown. And I was unique in that, because most of my friends didn't get that opportunity. And I always felt I had an advantage because I was mixing with the other side of the community. And that stayed with me my whole life, through university, through travel, and now in business. And I really believe that this society is moving away from that green and orange discussion. And if you look at my daughter again at 10, when she's 30, genuinely, someone said to me once 10 years ago that when a society comes out of conflict, it normally takes 50 odd years to heal and repair. And that means that 2 generations will pass. And it's a really interesting thought, because we've had one generation which has passed now, and there's another is going to pass in the not too distant future. And I reiterate, I'm saying to people, what will this place look like in 20 years? And it's going to go like that. So I really don't buy into the sort of 50+1. I accept what Graham's saying. I understand the point that he's making, that Leo Varadkar had said. But I actually don't think that that's going to be a problem. I don't think there should be a United Ireland referendum tomorrow. I think there should be one in the next 5 to 7 years. And I think that within this time frame, I honestly, bringing it back to my day job, I explain mortgage products and finances and loans to people. And once you actually break stuff, like, people are not stupid. And if you can break it down in layman's terms, forget about the green and the orange side of it, but break it down in layman's terms, most people actually can understand stuff, right? And I think what has depressed me living and working in Northern Ireland is, if you listen to our radio shows and I watch your television and a couple of journalists, all they want to talk about is identity, sovereignty. I'm not interested, really. I'm not interested in.
Okay.
I'm more interested in, how are we going to build our health? You know, so let me get into the financial side just briefly in this. You know, so most people know, like, in the last 10 years, we are 3,000 beds less in the Northern Ireland NHS than 10 years ago. 3,000 beds less. We need billions to fix and repair our NHS. And Anya, we're now getting to the crux of where I'm at with this. And this is a working discussion. If you speak to, I have some friends who are headmasters and headmistresses of primary schools. If you speak to them, have a pint with them in a pub for an hour, their budgets has been cut every year for the last 10 years. If you put a planning application in for 50 houses in Cookstown today, it's likely it will be rejected because there's no capacity in the sewage system. The infrastructure needs upgraded. We need about £3 billion in Northern Ireland today to fix and repair our infrastructure. What's the biggest challenge facing the world today? Climate change. Where are we going to get the billions that we need in Northern Ireland to fix and repair climate change? Where's the money coming from? Very quickly, I could write you out a £15 billion wish list on the back of a fag pack and say, we need about 15 to 20 billion pounds today. And here's the thing about Northern Ireland, and this is what I want to get out there in these kinds of discussions. Money and finance is complicated, but in Northern Ireland terms, you only have to be able to count to 30. It's primary school mathematics, right? We collect 28 billion in taxes. We collect 18.5 billion in taxes. It costs 28 billion to run this place. There's a subvention, which is a grant from the UK government. Let's round it up to 10 billion. So we don't have enough money today to pay for things, to fix things, to repair things. And really, this is the nub of my very existence on this topic at the moment. What's been brought forward and what Graham's really then offering with what he's suggesting to me and others and people who are talking about this in that vein is the status quo. And I read Graham's article, which was a brilliant article in the newsletter, Graham, I have to say. But the point that you're trying to say is it is what it is. You know, it's part of the United Kingdom. You know, we're not too bad over here. You know, we get this subvention, 10 billion every year, and the English are sort of happy to send that. And honestly, on so many levels, that's totally wrong. It's defeatist. It won't work for me. It won't work for lots of other people. And if you listen to George Osborne, who was the finance minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in January time, I mean, if you listen to his quotes, he's pretty much said that, you know, it's only a matter of time before there's a United Ireland. He's talked about the economic United Ireland. So leading conservative politicians are actually talking about this now and rejecting the claims that Graham is making in some of his writings and some of our leading unionist politicians. So it's just not working. Anya, the status quo is not working. Northern Ireland's not working. And the reality is, if it's not working over here, people are going to vote for and want something else. And that's what we need to be looking at.
Graham, how do you deal with those points that the status quo isn't working today? There isn't enough money, even on a yearly basis, and that Northern Ireland needs about 15 billion in investment. Where's it going to come from?
Yes, thanks, Anya. Yeah, I agree with Conor. There's a need for more public investment. Really, since the banking crisis of 2008, we've had a long period of austerity and low levels of public expenditure cutbacks in quite a few areas. But exactly the same is true of the Irish Republic. I can't see, with due respect to Conor, that this is an argument that's got any relevance for Irish unity. And I think in both jurisdictions, those who want more public expenditure need to campaign for that politically. Obviously, I think in both jurisdictions there's a particular problem now after COVID, because both governments have been paying billions and billions of pounds to combat COVID, and the national debt in both countries has now risen to a very high level, 110% of GDP in the UK. I'm not quite sure what it is in the Republic, but very high. So it's difficult to imagine that we're going to fund this extra public expenditure through additional borrowing. I think governments in both jurisdictions will be keen to try and cut their deficits. Perhaps not as much as happened after the banking crisis, but nevertheless go in that direction. But as I say, I don't think it's got anything much to do with Irish unity. Perhaps I could just add to this. It does seem to me that Northern Ireland is an extraordinarily nice, good place to live. I mean, the same might be true of the Republic. I haven't lived there, but I have got a house in Northern Ireland in County Down, and get over there as often as I can. And it always strikes me what a good place to live. And part of that is because living standards are actually higher in Northern Ireland than in the Republic. That's what the newsletter article that Conor was just kindly referring to was about. It's very hard to imagine that people in the north would vote to join a country which has actually lower living standards. Actually, living standards in Northern Ireland are very close to the UK average because of this subvention, the way in which something like half of the cost of public services in Northern Ireland is financed from London rather than from local taxes. But that's been the situation for decades and decades. It's a stable situation. It's not going to change. Seems to upset Conor to some extent, but I don't think people should regard it as a sort of handout. It's we really need that money in Northern Ireland, partly because of additional needs, like health needs, for instance. Health isn't quite as good in Northern Ireland as it is in parts of England, and partly that extra public expenditure is well-paid jobs in Northern Ireland and is keeping people in Northern Ireland, and because those extra people in Northern Ireland, they need extra public services. So it's a complex matter, and I think it's quite false to view it as a handout or a subsidy because the Northern Ireland economy doesn't work very well. Northern Ireland economy works very well. Go onto the website of Invest NI and look at all the great successes in high-tech industries, in financial industries and so on. Northern Ireland doing pretty well. Northern Ireland, I think, on the latest figures, had the lowest unemployment of any UK region. I mean, that's absolutely stunning. All the years I ran the Northern Ireland Economic Research Centre in Belfast, I mean, high unemployment was the problem we were addressing nearly all the time. It's a problem that's gone away. You know, job creation has been pretty good in Northern Ireland. And people now migrate in large numbers into Northern Ireland, whereas right up until about the turn of the century, the opposite had been true for many decades or even centuries. So Northern Ireland, a good place to live. Okay, we need more public expenditure. Complicated argument in present circumstances, but let's have that argument as an argument within the UK, just as people within the Republic have to have exactly the same argument with their own government.
So Conor, how do you deal with that question? The investment you say you needed, and also the living standards that people enjoy in Northern Ireland compared with the Republic of Ireland. If I am that unaligned voter, if identity isn't necessarily what's persuading me, if I am looking at, my lifestyle, what's in my pocket, what my family have to lose, why would the risks of unity persuade me over where I am now in the Union?
So this is why these kinds of discussions are happening, and they're going to intensify over the next few years, because we need to talk about this stuff, and it is complicated and there is layers of complexity. And the only thing that I probably agree with in Graham's most recent contribution is that it is a nice place to live. It is a lovely place, and we all know that. But I want to address a couple of things specifically. One of the solutions that Graham mentioned was to, we simply need to campaign for more public expenditure. And to be honest, we've been campaigning till we're blue in the face, and we've been told by successive Northern Ireland Secretary of States who have been huge disappointings, from James Brokenshire to Karen Bradley to the existing Secretary of State, who there is no appetite to provide any further public expenditure to Northern Ireland. So, like Graham, that's a non-runner, and you have to know that, given your experience in this over many decades. We had the budget last week, for example, and the Northern Ireland got allocated £411 million. Now, the Department of Finance has come out to say that 406 million of that is for COVID-related issues, which leaves £5 million for additional expenditure. There is a £1.7 billion bill for unmet needs this year alone. The place is treading water, falling apart. And honestly, like Graham, I just don't think you're ever going to agree to this, but if you're a businessman like me, the difference between me and I think politicians fail miserably in this because they don't seem to get this. We don't have enough money. We're not a productive enough economy. We can't compete with the Republic of Ireland. We have their business-friendly policy has totally transformed that jurisdiction in the last 40 years. Graham was referring to the Earraigh report, the work of Adele Bergen and Seamus McGuinness, and in your article, Graham, you're quite scathing of the report, and that's fair enough. But what I'm saying to people is, let's have all the information. Let's get it out there and let people interpret it themselves. And my interpretation of that report from the Royal Irish Academy by Seamus and Adele was different to Graham's. And yes, I understand that some of the numbers, and it can get quite technical, but if you look at the headlines in that report, who is better off? And these studies, by the way, need to intensify. We need a lot more data. But they talked about living standards. They talked about the risk of poverty. He talks about the education process, our young people, and even right up into lifespan. And on every metric in that report, the Republic of Ireland is coming in stronger than Northern Ireland. So like Graham has reported on that report, others I think will interpret it differently. What I'm saying is, let people interpret it themselves. We're not stupid. We can read, we can understand stuff. Now let me point out something that's really important. What happened today in the Republic of Ireland? I'm a businessman, I get this. I'm always raising money and investment for businesses. I've spent my professional life trying to persuade investors to come into Northern Ireland. This is what I do. The NTMA, which manages Ireland's National Debt and Strategic Investment Fund, today went to the bond market and raised another billion euro at 0.01%. Okay, so without getting too technical, they've raised €1 billion today to try and fix and repair their economy. In January, the Republic of Ireland raised 5.5 billion. They were offered 40 billion. Okay, that was negative interest rates. To keep it simple, negative interest rate is where investors are paying you to take their capital and spend it. Unbelievable, right? The point I'm making to you is, and this is where I'm at in this debate, this is why we need to talk about this stuff. The big difference between, apart from the tax regime and the foreign direct investment, which is flowing into the Republic of Ireland for 40 years, the fact that our two biggest indigenous companies, Glendimplex and Olmec, invested in Dundalk, 60 million euro in the last 5 years. They moved out of Northern Ireland capital. They didn't invest in Northern Ireland. But here's the big thing. The Republic of Ireland has a lot of debt, but it can go to the financial markets and it can raise money to fix things. We can't. We have to go with the begging bowl, Oliver Twist. You know, I want some more money. Just give us some more money. And what's the answer all of the time? No, no, never. And what did the Chancellor do last Wednesday? unbelievably, he has raised the corporation tax levels in Northern Ireland in 24 months to 25%. And you can kiss goodbye to any kind of investor, because I am one, setting up in Northern Ireland in the next 4 years. The other problem that we have in the north is this protocol, which is Graham's right. It's a sovereignty issue for people who have that problem with it, that brand of political unionism. But what investor is going to come and invest in Northern Ireland millions of pounds whenever Stormont can decide in 4 years' time to do away with it? It's not going to happen. It's a mirage. And all I'm saying in this discussion is, I understand numbers. I'm trying to influence this discussion because I want my young girl to grow up in a good society, in a good economy, where she has good job prospects and good health prospects. And I'm smart enough to understand the information. And I actually think everybody else in Northern Ireland, forgetting about green or orange, yes, there will be people from a unionist identity who will never vote for United Ireland. But the demographic that I know and work and play with amongst unionism aren't like that. And all I'm saying is the magic of the Good Friday Agreement is it lets people decide. And this is where I've gravitated to. I'm actually quite passionate about it now, because I think in an all-island economy, we can have a brilliant time. I think it can be a really exciting opportunity, and it won't impact on people's identity. It hasn't impacted on mine. And if the switch is flicked, I don't see why it should have impact on the unionist identity.
You raised the issue of the protocol, Conor. Can you, Graham, can you come in on that, and how, I know it's united unionist politicians in campaigning against it, and however much Number 10 is going its own way in its implementation and interpretation of the protocol at the moment, and the EU taking legal action and so on. Nonetheless, it makes Northern Ireland, doesn't it, a destabilised place, because this argument about its position, its relative to the UK or the Republic of Ireland, is constantly back in debate. So that destabilising effect, and also whatever the noise is from Number 10, they are still talking protocol. Will the DUP ultimately be let down again?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. Could I just make two very quick points about what Conor has just said? Firstly, to repeat that the argument about better public investment is true, but it's exactly the same in the Republic, and you know, really makes no difference. Got nothing much to do with any debate about United Ireland. Secondly, Conor raised the issue of corporation tax. I was part of the successful campaign to transfer responsibility for corporation tax from the Treasury in London to the executive in Belfast, and that's been done. The legislation has gone through, and if the Assembly wants to operationalise this, they can. So the Assembly and the executive can take over corporation tax if they want and charge whatever rate they want. The idea was always that they would probably set the same rate as the Republic, 12.5%. And there's a bigger incentive to do that now, since the UK is planning to increase its corporation tax rate from 18% to 26%. If Northern Ireland had 12% or even 10%, it would make it a very attractive place in tax terms. So it's something that Northern Ireland can do if it wants. There's nobody to stop it. But to come on to the protocol, as you're asking, my guess is that the people on the UK side negotiating the withdrawal agreement and the protocol didn't really understand fully what they were letting themselves in for. We were told all the time that the key matter was to stop goods illegally going across the border into the Republic and therefore into the European Union against EU regulations. And it was a matter of concentrating on what those goods were. And then what we actually find is that the The issue is having what's called the Union Customs Code. That's the customs laws of the Republic applied in their entirety to Northern Ireland, whether goods are in any danger of any risk of going into the Republic or not. And the EU is trying to apply that rigorously. In other words, the outer border, the outer trade border of the European Union is now being moved to the Irish Sea and applied in ways that so that everything going into Northern Ireland from GB will need a customs declaration. All food will be subject to checks. And from next year, all drugs and medicine will also be subject to checks. So that, for instance, sending drugs or medication within the National Health Service from Britain to Northern Ireland, everything would have to be checked before it got into Northern Ireland. This is absolute nonsense. It's the single market of the European Union is in no danger from most of this, and it's in no danger from food and other things coming into Northern Ireland supermarkets, which are sold in Northern Ireland. They're not going across the Republic's border or any other border. And I think what's happened is that this was all really negotiated under the disastrous Theresa May government. I think that'll go down as probably the most disastrous government the UK has had, certainly since the Second World War. And Boris Johnson was, when he was first elected, was faced with a very unedifying choice that really either give up Brexit altogether or sign up for the protocol. So he signed up for the protocol, but now regrets it, and the government is rowing back. And as we saw, the first real move on that was the extension of the grace periods last week by the new negotiator, David Frost. And I think we're going to see more in that direction. Either the EU comes to its senses and said, look, we'll settle for some reasonable and practical means of protecting the single market for goods which are likely to cross the single market, which doesn't include all the supermarket goods, or they can continue with their current trajectory, in which case there's just going to be an ongoing battle between the EU and the British government on this. And in a sense, the British government is bound to win on this because all the checks have to be done by British officials. It's the British government that has to put this into operation. And if they refuse to do so, then it's not going to be done. Of course, the EU will try and retaliate in various ways. But I think that the mood in London now and in the Conservative politicians I talk to is let's get on and do this. Either the protocol that has got to be weakened down to a level in which Northern Ireland isn't disadvantaged in the way that it is at present and looks to be more disadvantaged in future months, or else we're going to get rid of the protocol in one way or another. It's really up to the EU, to put it in undiplomatic language. They're playing silly buggers on this, and they've got to stop.
Conor, do you see unionism being able to make the protocol effectively go away, and the impact of this row in making Northern Ireland and its place, its relationship, both politically and economically, with the polities around it, a much more contested space than it was for the last 30 years?
I think the protocol. There's a couple of things I'll say in this. I think sometimes whenever you're living in this every day, we're definitely a fishbowl here. I think sometimes we need to get over our own self-importance. There's 455 million people living in the European Union. There's 27 countries. Here we are, we Northern Ireland, the tail wagging the dog. The DUP held the balance of power in Westminster for 4 or 5 years, lording it around Westminster. They were paid 450 odd grand to help deliver Brexit. They were warned, that brand of unionism was warned by everyone in the world that this was going to be an absolute horlicks, an absolute mess. And what has happened since? Arlene Foster came out a couple of months ago to say there was advantages, there's the best of both worlds. And in the last 6 weeks, there's been a huge change within the DUP, where they're now singing the hymn of Jim Allister. I think what you're seeing here, it's difficult to work out. I spoke to one of my clients last week about this, because it's always trying to get to the nub of it, because politics messes everything up in Northern Ireland. And there's some issues with the protocol for sure. But as a business owner and an entrepreneur, all we do, Anya, from the moment you wake up till you sleep at night, is solve problems. You know, one of the ways to do this is get rid of all the politicians, let the business people in to figure it out. But then we can't do that, because what we know is there's a sovereign issue going on, and there's a fight within political unionism because we have an election next year. And I mean, this has happened twice, and this is something which I think is you know, it starts to antagonize the majority then, because Nelson McCausland said this 4 years ago on television, and Jim Allister said it a few weeks ago when Matthew O'Toole asked him, would he encourage an FDI investor to invest money, given the best of both worlds scenario in Northern Ireland today? Would he encourage an FDI investor to invest in his constituency? And of course, Mr. Allister says, no, because it affects my sovereignty, or words to that effect. Now, that's the point, and that's the issue. And we go back to the start of the discussion, where Graham and that brand of unionism, which I think is way in the minority, thinks we're talking about identity issues. And the fascinating thing about this referendum in the next 5 to 7 years, I think it'll definitely happen, is more people will have moved on. More younger people. The Republic of Ireland is a more social and more liberal and more open society. We've seen all of the changes in the last 30 years. I genuinely don't see that particular brand of unionism representing the unionists I know. So there is a problem with the protocol. It can be sorted out, but I really believe that the brand of political unionism needs to get over itself. There's 450 million people in the European Union, 27 countries. We can't wag the dog in this one. We did in Brexit, but there's not a mission that we're going to wag the European Union's tail here in this. It's not going to happen.
And Conor, I'm sorry, Graham, coming back to you, and in the context of what Conor was saying there, and given that this row about the protocol is likely to drag on for a while, the other question is whether the issue of the union is stable in its centenary year. Could, for instance, a Scottish independence referendum be a game changer that would raise all kinds of questions about the union and Northern Ireland's position within that union, and again, relationship with the polities around it?
Sorry, Anya, you're asking whether the union is stable in a political sense. Is that the?
It's how much? Yes, how much change is you know, we have the change happening in terms of the row about the protocol, and also within the United Kingdom, the demands for Scottish referendum, which could well happen in the next couple of years, and the consequences that could flow from that for Northern Ireland and for the union.
Yes, I think you're right. If Scotland was to split itself off from the UK, I think that probably would affect Northern Ireland, probably in difficult to predict ways. Certainly, Northern Ireland would be geographically, in a sense, more peripheral to what was then a country dominated by England and Wales. My own view is that Scotland won't split off, and you'll have seen the latest polls. I mean, in the latest polls, I think only 43% of people in Scotland are supporting Scottish independence. And my view has always been that it's much harder for the SNP to vote to argue for independence once the whole UK is out of the EU, as it is. They're then having to suggest that they will split Scotland from its main market and then join up with a more peripheral and less important market and give back control. The slogan of "give back control to Brussels," I think, you know, it isn't going to attract many votes in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but that's really what it amounts to. So I don't think that'll happen. But if it did happen, then it does affect Northern Ireland. I agree. Is Northern Ireland's position in the union stable? I think so. I've talked about the poll results. By the way, I think this whole argument is rather muddied by polls we get from the Lucid Talk organisation, which shows support for Irish unity running about 45%. Other polls show it running at nearer 25%. both can't be right. I mean, those are hugely different results. And the Lucid Talk poll comes from a panel of volunteers. You can volunteer, and indeed we know of several people who've who are on the panel 5 times. They put themselves forward under different email addresses, and that panel looks as if it's pretty politicized. Probably isn't reliable on this issue. So if we go back to the Life and Times survey of Queen's University, as I said, support for United Ireland about a quarter, something like that, about a half of what it's running at in Scotland. It seems to me, after everything that's happened, if that's all the support that the United Ireland gets, it's really not going to happen. We're in a much more stable position, I think, than most people imagine. And I just wish a lot of those who write and talk about a United Ireland day after day would just back off. I mean, I regard it as a form of political harassment, really. It's not going to happen. The great majority of the unionists absolutely don't want it to happen. And if we agree that we don't have a United Ireland without the consent of the unionists, then it's pie in the sky, I'm afraid.
So Graham, you think it's pie in the sky, and Conor, how much do you think, both in terms of the impact of the possible Scottish independence referendum and also the growth and support for Sinn Féin in the South, the possibility that they would be part of a government after the next election and seeking to have a border poll?
Well, look, I just think, I think I really respect what Graham has just said. He thinks it's a waste of time. He's not interested in it. He thinks there's no support for it, and there'll be others who are at the other extreme, and that's fine. But I think what one needs to recognise whenever you talk about these things, we're coming out the back of a conflict. 23 years, the Good Friday Agreement. It spent years to get there. The magic of the Good Friday Agreement, it brought peace. Maybe not a perfect peace, but the Northern Ireland today is a million miles away from the one I walked the streets of Cookstown in the 80s. Whenever the T-bomb went off in the 90s, it's a totally transformed society, and part of that agreement, international agreement, was that there's a referendum in there if the British government thinks that there's an appetite for it, and that's just a fact. So it doesn't really matter what Graham says or I say or anybody else. That's the fact, and we cannot rewrite these things. We have had too much pain, so let's accept and buy into the process, right? Okay. So what we know is that Brexit is a tsunami that has changed everything. And these kinds of discussions are to be welcomed. And one of the things I did something, it started out as a bit of crack this week, but I'm the Bank of England, there was an article in the Financial Times in January time. And it was the weight that the Bank of England were putting on the evidence and the advice and the feedback they were getting from their agents. And the Bank of England have 9,000 agents all over the UK. And every month they send out 700 agents to speak to people in the community to get feedback to see what's going on. And they put more weight in this off the back of Brexit. Now, interestingly, I'm one of the agents in Northern Ireland. So they come and talk to me and say, how's it going? What's happening in Belfast? What about the protocol? What about the economy? And it's fascinating that I was reading how much weight, and then that's feeded back into the policy committee, and then they start formulating central bank policy. Okay, what I've done and what I know is what is happening now is it's the value of that anecdotal evidence. And this week I text 5 of my closest business colleagues to see what they would vote for or what was the stronger economy, Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland. I'm only sharing this with you, but that escalated very quickly to 65 people within about 2 hours. And the responses, Graham, I would nearly text them to you, you want to see them. And I'm only saying to you, 95% of the people who responded to that question responded that the Republic of Ireland economy is a much stronger economy, right? So it was, that's like an unfair question. And of that was a senior partner in a law firm in Belfast, 3 economists, a senior local engineer, people who understand this stuff, right? And that's anecdotal evidence. And what I think where this is all going to go is, regardless of what Graham says and what I say, these conversations are happening everywhere. They're going to happen as we open up our economy. people are going to be saying, what about what about that discussion on the Shared Ireland podcast, on the Féile podcast? What do you think? And I think that's where it's at, Anya. The conversation needs to be had. The Northern Ireland economy is a life support machine at the moment, and I think we deserve better. And that's really why I'm involved in this discussion, because I want to facilitate that kind of debate.
Do you know, our time is almost up, and there's so much I haven't had time to get into. And in many ways, we've only scratched the surface today. And I really, really do appreciate the candor with which both of you have addressed, hopefully my not too lame questions. So I'm going to give a final one to each of you. Graham, you had the opening word, so it'll be Conor with the final word. So to you, Graham, first. And that's, I've learned in my profession to be very wary of predictions. Human beings are notoriously bad at predicting the future. On the other hand, in this debate, one of you is likely to be proved right, and one of you is likely to be proved wrong. So given that, how you see the next 10 years with all that's going on playing out for Northern Ireland? Graham.
I was just going to say, Anya, perhaps we could reconvene in 10 years' time and see who see if we were all wrong, which is always the most likely outcome, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there is that. Yes.
Where we'll be in 10 years' time. I mean, my view is we'll be well. I won't be around, but people will be around to celebrate the second centenary of Northern Ireland in 2121. But over the next 10 years. I think things will settle down. The protocol is stirring up matters quite a bit, but I think people will come to their senses. I think Brussels will back off on a lot of this, and we'll end up with a level of checks that can that the Northern Ireland economy can live with. And there are advantages from the protocol to the Northern Ireland economy. For instance, if you ask Invest NI, they said in January they had pretty well a record level of inquiries from investors moving into Northern Ireland. You know, investors from US, India, interestingly, a large source of inquiries. You know, people looking at Northern Ireland as something facing both ways into the UK and into the EU. So I think the Northern Ireland economy will do pretty well. The border issues will probably settle down. I certainly hope they'll settle down. Of course, we do in Northern Ireland have a vote in 4 years' time whether we want to carry on with the protocol. So if it continues to be as troublesome as it currently is on the border, then you know there's more likelihood of people voting it down. But I think that will settle down, and we'll have another census. We're having, well, in England, the census forms have been sent out. I don't know if you've had them already, Conor, in Cookstown as well.
Yeah.
We'll get census results, and we'll see more about the growth of the Catholic population, and we'll have some more polls. But I can't see a move towards anything approaching a majority for United Ireland. So that argument will go on, but in my view, it won't get anywhere. So I'm hoping in 10 years' time that things will be more settled and more prosperous. I certainly hope that COVID will be a long and distant past by then. But then, I'm afraid I've always been one of life's optimists. I always believe things are likely to get better. Not always right on you, but I hope I will be this time.
Okay, so Conor, the final word. Look into your crystal ball for Northern Ireland over the next decade. How you see the forces at play that will shape the outcome of events.
Well. If I had a criticism of human beings and people, I think we're way too passive. And what I would encourage people, you know, whenever I speak to some family, particularly around COVID issues and political issues, people think they can't create change. You know, you can't change things. Why would I get involved? And what I would say to people is, you know, I've worked with Nick Leeson over the last 10 years, and he says education is nothing without understanding. And I've applied my brain to this in the last 18 months, and I haven't liked what I've seen around the cost of Northern Ireland, the fact we can't go to the markets, we can't raise money, we can't pay for things, we can't improve things. And my hope in the next 5 years is that all of this information gets out into the public domain. And just like my day job with GDP, once you explain it to people, I trust people. I really do, but I trust people that they can make their own decisions, which will be the best outcome for them and their family. And that's where I see this going. I see Brexit changing everything. The whole dynamics has changed. I understand, and I would agree with Graham actually, that if Brexit never happened, then this might go away. But it's not going to happen now. Things have changed. We're in new territory. And all I would like is that this financial information gets out into the public domain, and that these conversations continue in a very respectful manner and an engaging and a robust nature that they need to be. Because right back to my 10-year-old, she's going to be 30, and what's this place going to look like? And I hope it's a lot more positive than it is today.
Conor Devine and Graham, thank you both. Graham, Gudgin, thank you both. I'm so grateful to you both. I've really enjoyed this time. It's absolutely flown in, and it's been a pleasure. Apologies for the lameness of any questions there or the lack of financial knowledge. And I hope the people watching were as engaged by what you each had to say as I was. Thank you so much. And thank you to Féile for putting us all together. I'm only sorry it wasn't in person. And I hope that, Graham, you get to see that house of yours in County Down very soon. And Conor, you get to celebrate your birthday, and that anyone who's watching this has enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed talking to you both. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Anya.